Well, thank you, Anna, and good morning, AFN. It's wonderful to be home. It is an honor to be with all of you. It's incredible to look out and see all of our leaders, our elders, our delegates, our youth representatives, community members gathered here today. Thank you for the great work of this organization and for all of you that work to lift up our communities, preserve your cultures, and strengthen our state, all of us together. By the way, I heard the Elders and Youth Conference went really well. I want to thank first Alaskan Institutes, and went really well. And the FAI's president, Roy Agluinga, and their young leaders for the fine job they didn't do just this year, but that they do every year with regard to the Elders and Youth Conference, which is such an empowering event. I want to thank AFN's leadership, particularly Anna and Ben Malott. I think Ben is having a great first year. Joe, all the leadership here. It's such a strong group at AFN. And I really want to do a shout out to my very, very good friend, Lyman Hoffman, who was awarded yesterday for his lifelong service. I can't think of a more fierce advocate, not just for Alaskan Natives, but for Alaska. And you do not want to get on Lyman Hoffman's bad side. I've always tried to avoid that in my career. He is an incredible advocate and a good friend. And of course, the most important Alaskan Native in the world for me is also here, my wife, Julie. We recently celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary, so I'm a very lucky guy. Thank you to my wife, who, by the way, always sits in the front row and cheers me on. So it's great. Well, look, I want to begin, of course, by talking about Typhoon Halong's devastation across the YK Delta. A tragedy of this size and immensity is something we have to all focus on. So many of you have loved ones who have been very negatively affected. This morning, your congressional delegation sent a letter to President Trump requesting swift approval of the state's disaster declaration to get the federal dollars flowing. And I have been, for the last several days, in regular contact with federal officials, state officials, tribal officials, senior White House officials, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the FEMA director, the vice president, and hopefully some of you saw the vice president put a social media post out this morning. He says, President Trump and I are closely tracking the storm devastation that resulted in over 1,000 of our citizens being airlifted out of Alaskan Native villages in western Alaska. Alaska, he says to all of us, our prayers are with you, and your federal government is going to work to get you the help that you need. So I think that's good when it comes from the top of the administration. And of course, I want to thank everybody here for all the hard work you're doing. Tragically, one life has been lost, 2 others remain missing as this powerful storm raged. But seeing Alaskans coming together, more than 50 people were rescued by our courageous Coast Guard and Alaskan National Guard forces. That is really incredible. And now, of course, we have almost 1,400 Alaskans forced from their homes, sheltering in buildings and temporary centers. So we are grateful for AFN and everybody affiliated here for stepping up to help. We are working longer term. We've been doing this for a number of years on this issue. What do I mean? As these storms grow more frequent and severe, I've been focused on longer term protections for rural Alaska. Last year we secured in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Senator Murkowski and I worked on a couple years ago, more than $45 million in resilience grants for our rural communities, and importantly, working directly recently with the EPA administrator we secured an historic amount of money for the Denali Center, for the Denali Commission, almost $140 million for the Denali Commission from the EPA to focus on these kind of infrastructure issues, and perhaps most importantly, as part of what's called the WRDA Act, that's the Water Resources and Development Act, in 2022 and 2024, I put in a provision in there that's specific only to Alaska to combat storm damage, erosion, and flooding. And the good part about that bill is that 90% of that is paid for by the federal government. So right now, the efforts from that bill are making a difference in places like Utqiagvik, where we're able to get almost $400 million for the seawall there. That's complete erosion protection, and in Juneau and in other areas. So we think that's very important, but we have more work to do. Let me mention infrastructure for rural Alaska also means the ability to communicate, which is why my team and I worked night and day to make sure our rural radios continued to get the funding they need to stay on the air. So that's also infrastructure. We are working hard on that. But as I mentioned, we believe more needs to be done. I recently spoke with the CEO of AVCP, Vivian Corthius, about her idea of establishing a Western Alaska emergency response hub, an interagency, intertribal, federal, and state partnership to strengthen coordination for future disasters. We think this is a really good idea, and we're looking into it. So again, to our first responders, tribal leaders, Coast Guard, thank you again. Julie and I continue to pray for everybody. How about another round of applause for all of them? So this year's theme, Standing Strong, Standing United, could not come at a better time. These are not just words, they are a way of life. They are focused on resilience. Standing strong means holding fast to your values, your traditions. Standing united means that we work together. When we work together, we can accomplish so much. So one of the things we're working on, there we go, nope, next slide, the salmon slide. Yeah. Hey, how do you want to get the different slide set? One of the things we're working on, we have a slide presentation here, we a little bit mixed up, is on salmon. Salmon is a way of life in Alaska, especially rural Alaska. When the salmon are strong, our communities are strong. That's why over the past several years, I've made the salmon crisis one of my top priorities in the Senate, especially when it comes to subsistence on our great rivers like the Yukon and Kuskokwim. A number of years ago, I passed the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act, which brought together our best minds, Native, state, federal, tribal, university, to address the big question we all have. What is happening to the different salmon runs in our state, and why is there such great variability, particularly when it comes to, like I said, the Yukon and Kuskokwim? This research that we got done in this bill is now underway to begin getting results, real data that will guide us to what we all want: strong, sustainable salmon runs across all species in all Alaska rivers. We've been working on the next phase, new legislation to strengthen salmon management and habit restoration, building on what the task force has found. So we're going to do a new bill we're working on now, which will include components for developing and employing technologies and policies to reduce salmon bycatch in the ocean that are harming our salmon runs. I also worked hand in hand with so many here to promote and protect Alaskan Native artists and your culture. And we've got some good news from last week when it comes to that. For nearly a decade, we have been working to fix a real injustice. Laws in other states intended to stop the trafficking of illegal African elephant ivory ended up hurting Alaskan Native artists who are lawfully and sustainably using walrus ivory in your tradition. Beautiful artwork. It made no sense. And by the way, it was devastating when states were saying we can't buy Alaskan Native walrus ivory in terms of the artwork that they do. Our Alaskan Native artists had done everything right in terms of abiding by the law, and suddenly they couldn't sell their beautiful artwork across state lines. It was an attack on generations of culture and heritage. So, we held hearings, actually here at AFN, on this issue, and we held specific briefings back in Washington, D.C. with many of our artists. And I'm pleased to say that last week, after almost 10 years of trying, the Senate passed my Alaska's Right to Ivory Sales and Tradition Act, what we called the Artists Act, and we passed it unanimously. So I want to thank everybody. There were so many people who worked so hard on this. Melanie Banky, Megan, Vera Metcalf, Nagaruk Harkachuk, and our incredible walrus ivory artisans. There's so many. You guys are seeing them here at AFN. They do great work. We got to pass this in the House. We're going to sign this into law, and then our Alaska Native artists can sell their beautiful work anywhere in America, as it should have been for many, many years. Let me turn to another issue we're working on, and that is our 8A program. And by the way, I want to thank all of you, our 8A program, but our ANCs, village corporations, regional corporations, tribes. I know Natasha Singh in her remarks yesterday made some really important points on how much this matters to our economy, not just for Alaska Natives, but for everybody. And so we have undertaken a comprehensive strategy to make sure that people in Washington, D.C. understand the value of this program. Of course, it means a lot to us, but it means a lot when you look at it, for example, to our Department of Defense, to our Pentagon. We have been making the case to everybody. We recently got a nice letter from one of the senior Pentagon officials who said, we understand the 8A program, we're going to keep it going, and we're going to expand it. That is great for Alaska, that is great for our Alaska Native communities. It's also great for our military. So I want to thank all of you who have done such great work on that. Okay, I think our slides are up. Well, let's see if we can go to the next slide. Another issue that we've been working on, and one of the most important bills that I've worked on in my time in the U.S. Senate is our bill to extend the Alaska Native Vietnam Veterans Land Allotment Program for another 5 years. Now, this is an issue that I get kind of emotional on because I see our Native veterans, and if we ever get my slides up, you'll see some great photos of George Bennett and Ben O'Cleveland and Bill Thomas. These are American heroes who, generation after generation, our Alaska Native community have served our country with what I call special patriotism. Alaska Natives serve in the military at higher rates than any other ethnic group in the country. And yet, when our Vietnam veterans came home, they couldn't apply for their allotment. They weren't treated well. So in 2019, I was able to get my Alaska Native Vietnam Veterans Bill passed. It said, hey, if you were serving in the military, especially in Vietnam, when a lot of people, let's face it, American men were avoiding service, and you missed a chance to apply for your allotment, you get to do it now. So that bill passed. Unfortunately, the implementation of that bill by the last administration was very, very, very slow. They approved in 4 years 40 allotments out of 2,000. Not good. And guess what? The program's going to expire in 2 months. So 2 weeks ago on the Senate floor, I went to the floor, I said, pass my legislation to extend this for 5 more years. And unfortunately, we had some senators who blocked it. I talked to them after, I'm like, come on, guys, what are you doing? This is outrageous. Don't block this. So here's my ask of AFN. Let's work together. Let's go to some of these senators who are blocking it. We got 2 more months before this program expires. This is a just cause, and if we work together, we can get 5 more years of this program. We can expand the lands available for our Alaskan Native Vietnam vets, and we really want to work together with all of you on this important legislation. So I've talked about some of the issues that we literally work on in the Senate day after day after day, daily. Our focus on Alaska Native issues is a daily thing we focus on, and we're honored to do that because all of you are so important to us, to our state. But I want to talk about one of the real big wins we had recently. If you go to the next slide there. Okay, next slide. There we go. And this is the Senate bill that was passed in the Budget Reconciliation Bill in July. What I like to call the Alaska Opportunity Act, because there are so many things in this bill that we have been trying to get done as a state for our Native communities. And I would say, due to the work of Senator Murkowski, Congressman Begich, and myself, we're very confident no state in the country did as well as we did in this big bill. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about what we tried to do, because the Alaskan Native issues, for all of us, we weaved into almost every component of this bill in a way that we think is going to have huge impacts for our Alaskan Native communities. So first, I want to talk about that one bullet there in this slide about health care. When this bill was written, it had Alaska in mind, particularly our Alaska Native community, with regard to health care. So let me just be clear on a whole host of things that's in this bill. It doesn't touch Social Security. It doesn't touch Medicare. And for Alaska, it doesn't touch Medicaid in terms of funding. Okay? That's a fact. Let me get some more specifics. For example, Alaska Native health organizations have always had 100% federal funding for Medicaid. Some people talked about reducing that. I said no way. This bill has 100% funding for Alaska Native health organizations for Medicaid, period. That's in the bill. Second, this bill creates, and the delegation from Alaska were the ones who led on this, a $50 billion rural health transformation program that was built with Alaska specifically in mind. This will deliver hundreds of millions of additional federal dollars for Alaska over the next 5 years to modernize clinics, hospitals, telemedicine, workforce training across our state. Let me give you more examples as it relates to Alaska Native organizations. There's a common sense work and volunteer requirement for Medicaid and SNAP, but it does not apply to Alaska Natives. That is something else we worked to make sure didn't happen. We secured a redetermination extension for Alaska to have more time and flexibility on updating its Medicaid eligibility that was very focused on Alaska Natives. We made sure that the telehealth system that our state has innovated on, that our Alaska Native health organizations have done such a good job on, is made permanent and is expanded so telehealth can be even more important in rural Alaska. So there are a whole host of provisions in this bill that we think are going to be outstanding for our state, particularly healthcare. So imagine, to my surprise, that we've seen a lot of ads on TV, on social media, in my view, trying to scare people, trying to scare elders, trying to scare seniors, saying that this bill is actually going to hurt them or cut funding for Alaska Natives. It's simply not true. It's not true. So here's the reality. The one thing as we were debating this bill and on the floor, amending it, the one group that tried to actually cut Medicaid for Alaskans during the negotiations was the Democratic leader of the U.S. Senate, Senator Schumer. So we stopped him. We stopped him from doing that. We put in this healthcare rural transformation fund and on a whole host of other comprehensive positive things for our state, especially for Alaskan Natives. This senator kept trying to come in and get rid of them. But here's the thing. Your delegation knows how to fight for the people we represent. That means you. And almost every single one of these times, they tried to come in this bill and strip out things that were good for Alaskan Natives, and there was a lot of them, and they tried to do it a lot. We fought and we beat them, and that's what we're trying to do in terms of your delegation to represent all of you strongly. Those are the facts, and you need to know them when you see these ads on TV that are not true. So let me go through a couple other of the provisions that we think are going to be really positive. First, for our North Slope communities, we were able to get, for our whaling captains and our hunters, extension of tax benefits for the communities as it relates to whaling and hunting expenses. This is something that was really important for the communities on the North Slope, for our whaling captains. A lot of people didn't like it. Your delegation made sure that was in there. We did something similar for the Community Development Quota Program that supports jobs and training and economic development in Western Alaska. The CDQ programs are really, really important programs for jobs in our native villages, for economic development. And again, we were able in this bill, despite some opposition, to strengthen those and make sure those are going to be even more important for rural development in Alaskan Native villages. A couple others, if you go to the next slide. More broadly, we are able to get provisions, there we go, dealing with securing the border, which we think is really important. People ask me, Senator, why do you care about securing the border? It's 4,000 miles away. Because we have the highest fentanyl overdose rates in the country. And a lot of those are in Alaskan Native villages. Last year, 2 years in a row, we've had the highest fentanyl overdose rates. Last year, we had almost 400 young people die of this poisoning. And one way to stop it is to secure the border and make sure that drug traffickers don't come into our Alaskan Native villages, don't come into our states. And so we think this is another huge priority for our state. If you look at this slide, it has a whole host of things for small businesses, for resource development in our state, responsible resource development that, again, so many communities here were focused on for housing. This expands the low-income housing tax credit, makes it permanent, which is really, really important. So all of these things are in this bill. We think it's a really strong bill. Our delegation worked hard together to put Alaska's interests, and particularly Alaska Native interests, in this bill. And we want to work with you on the implementation of this bill because it's so, so important. So let me conclude with a few other items here. The one thing we've been trying to do, when we go to the next slide. Next slide. No? Okay. Next slide, maybe? No, we'll get to that at the end. Okay. All right. Look. Boy, oh boy. Just leave that for the end for my team. One of the things that we're trying to do, and we're trying to do it right now with Homeland Security and other folks, is bringing federal officials to Alaska. And hopefully you've seen that, and you guys have been such great hosts. So over the course of the last several years, it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican administration, whenever someone goes through their cabinet advice and consent confirmation in the U.S. Senate, I always say to them, you got to come up to Alaska. You got to get out to rural Alaska. You got to meet with my wonderful constituents. And when they do that, they come away much more inclined to support us. And I want to thank all of you. We've done this year after year. Obama administration, Biden administration, Trump administration, doesn't matter, and it's having huge impacts. Let me just give you one example. Some of you might remember the broadband summit we put on recently, or a couple years ago, as it relates to getting broadband internet connectivity to our rural communities. When we wrote the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Senator Murkowski and I fought really hard for a formula on broadband federal dollars to make sure that it favored rural communities. There was a big debate. You had a lot of senators saying, hey, I represent urban areas. I want to go from 4G to 5G. And we were kind of like, yo, what about no G, right? Rural Alaska has no G. We need to prioritize rural Alaska communities first. We brought all the telecoms officials up to our state, held a big summit, and what are we seeing now? We're seeing hundreds of millions, if not billions, in federal dollars to our communities to connect via the internet and broadband. That is part of what we've been doing. We've had other visits just since June. You saw Secretary Burgum. This is a slide that shows several of the cabinet secretaries, Secretary Burgum, the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Wright, Secretary of Health and Human Services, and I want to thank Tanana Chiefs and ANTHC for hosting Secretary Kennedy, who was so important in his visit to Alaska a couple weeks ago. These visits are absolutely essential. So I want to thank all of you because you guys have been such great hosts. And I want to mention one other visit. There was something that I pressed the Pentagon on for a number of years. Some of you might remember the important visits just last year with senior military officers. Here we go, that's a good slide on that, who offered their apologies to the villages of Cake, Angoon, and Wrangell for attacks on Alaskan Natives during the late 1800s. And like I said, I strongly encouraged our military to do this. Now, last year I retired from the Marine Corps after 30 years, and I deeply respect our military, its traditions, its service, its sacrifice, like I know so many of you do. But no organization is perfect. And when our country makes mistakes, acknowledging them should be viewed as an act of strength, not weakness. So I was honored to attend the ceremony in Angoon. Julie attended the ceremony in Wrangell. Members of my team also attended the ceremony in Cake. These were important ceremonies to continue the healing process after generations of pain, and it was good to have our military finally do that in the communities. I'll just end with a couple more visits we had. Julie and I were recently in Wrangell for the Alaskan Native Brotherhood and Alaskan Native Sisterhood Grand Camp meetings. The ANB and ANS are some of the oldest indigenous organizations in America. We had a great visit. I am very proud to be an honorary member of ANB Camp 76 of Tennessee Springs. This is my ANB Camp of Tennessee Springs hat. Thank you, Sasha Sobolov and others. This is a huge honor for me. And during that visit, we have a slide there, I think we do, I spoke about one of the most extraordinary members of ANS, Elizabeth Perodovich. My Senate resolution, there we go, to establish Elizabeth Perodovich Day, which, by the way, passes the U.S. Senate every year, is meant to honor this great American civil rights leader. By the way, I love that mural in Juneau. That's a picture right there. And my hope is someday she'll be recognized in the same category as Martin Luther King Jr. by all Americans, not just Alaskans, as one of our nation's great civil rights leaders. And I know ANS and ANB are fully supportive in that important endeavor as well. So let me conclude with just two final topics. One, is one that I talk about pretty much every year, and it goes to the heart of who we are as a state and a people, and that's the fight to end sexual assault and domestic violence in our state. We are a great state in so many ways, but on this statistic, we are not so great. And I think we all need to just say it again. Violence against women, especially Alaskan Native women, is a scourge in our state and our country that we should not tolerate. So earlier this month, I went to the Senate floor to pass my Choose Respect Day resolution, Senate resolution, which reaffirms our commitment to ending domestic violence in our state and country. And I think working with so many in AFN, when I was Alaska's Attorney General, we launched our state's Choose Respect campaign. We passed laws, we ran public service announcements, we held rallies from the smallest villages to our largest cities on this topic, and a clear message: domestic violence has no place in our homes or communities. And as your senator, I've continued to focus on this difficult issue, but it's an issue we all need to look at and face. It's why I've authored the Choose Respect Act, which passed in 2022, and very importantly, what's called the Power Act. This bill, which passed, is making a profound difference because the bill has tens of thousands of lawyers now helping survivors escape abuse, navigate the courts, and rebuild their lives free of charge. And that's what this bill was all about. It has a particular emphasis on providing legal services for Native American women. And this is so important because when a survivor gets an attorney, they can often break out of the cycle of violence in which they found themselves. I know this is a hugely important issue for AFN and so many of you. We're going to continue to focus on it. These are the kind of things that we're starting to make an impact on. So let me conclude by this. We can pull up, there we go, that last slide. One of the great joys of my job in honors of being your U.S. Senator is I often go to the Senate floor to highlight somebody I call the Alaskan of the Week in a speech. And these Alaskans have one thing in common. They help others and they serve their communities. And guess what? And I didn't do it. I didn't intend to do it this way, but when we were looking at all the people we've honored, so many of them are Alaskan Natives, which I think reflects the essential contribution of Alaskan Natives to the betterment of our state and to the betterment of our country. So many. Couple examples you see on this slide, of course, Julie Kitka, for her decades of leadership, wisdom, and relentless advocacy leading AFN for 34 years. Cynthia Erickson, who through her nonprofit Situé has devoted countless of hours to creating safe spaces for children in trauma. And of course, some of these great Alaskans are unfortunately no longer with us, but their legacies live on in all of our lives because they touched so many of our lives. John Active of Bethel, one of the first Yupik language broadcasters whose voice carried the news and spirit of his people across Western Alaska. Saul Atkinson, look at that handsome guy in his Navy uniform right there. One of the original Navy SEALs, what they call a plank holder in the Navy SEALs, a hero of 3 combat tours in Vietnam, who went on to train not just Navy SEALs, astronauts, including Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin from Metlakatla. And after all this, he came home, ran for mayor, and continued to fight for the rights of veterans and serve his community until the end of his days. And then, of course, Jake Adams, a brilliant leader, a pillar of the North Slope, whose mentorship and friendship to me and countless others, is a blessing that I will always cherish. Alaska has the best people who are standing strong, standing united, and so many of them are from our Alaska Native community. So many of them are from all of you here It is an honor to be united, serving, and working together. I want to thank AFN again. I want to thank all of you. Anabasi. Thank you very much.
Well, I asked our co-chairs if I could have a minute after Senator Sullivan speaks. He talked about working with the administration to move critical. Current position now is federal co-chair of the Denali Commission, which is focused on rural infrastructure, housing, energy, bulk fuel storage on that. And I just wanted to personally thank Senator Sullivan for moving the EPA money on that. When we issued a master contract for $100 million to the Tribal Health Consortium, it was the most money going into bulk fuel. Then it was 20 years worth of funding in one master contract to move that forward. We have so many critical needs in all these different areas, and it is not easy to move money into these hard infrastructure projects, but I just wanted to tell you that that is true, it's real, and it's making a difference. And especially with the impacts of the typhoon on that, we're going to have a lot of critical infrastructure needs. We got to work together. We got to find out where the pieces of money are and try to move it forward. But I just wanted to let you know that I can attest to that's absolutely true what he's talking about, Murkowski and Sullivan and Congressman Begich and the governor and everybody working together to try to say, how can we solve those needs? So thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Hannah.